theme of the panel today is in your backyard. We've had quite an active backyard over the last couple of years. The regional ecosystem, as most of you know, has changed substantially with the advent of the first regional unicorns, the attraction of international VC firms, a push in corporate innovation, and a somewhat heavy nudge from the government for all to start embracing SMEs and innovation. So we're honored to have with us three gentlemen who will provide their insight and their vision and learnings from investing in the region. I'm going to start with Abdulrahman Tarabzouni. We have two Abdulrahman, so it's going to be a bit tough. I'm going to start with a quote that I found from Bloomberg from this year, where you said, value is shifting away from legacy telco assets into new industries globally. So let's leverage those existing assets now to get a leg into the future. Can you elaborate on that quote, but also kind of segue into STV's approach towards arming itself with next generation technologies that will be game changers in KSA and potentially globally? Absolutely.
So the question we asked ourselves is, there is a lot of disruption happening over and above the assets that we own and operate as a telco. Mm-hmm. Those assets, at a first cut, might seem to be very, telco heavy, telco dependent, but you realize fairly quickly that things like the network, the data that passes through the network, the billing relationships with customers on the network, are actually massive levers of growth for digital plays that sit on top of what a typical telco is today. And telcos are not wired, nor have the DNA to pursue these new value pools and to pursue these growth areas. And many telcos are trying and experimenting, and I think the jury is out on whether they are capable of building value in these new growth areas. But the fact of the matter is, it's really hard to get a multi-billion-dollar organization that has been optimized and wired to squeeze every inch of value out of being a telco to go and attack new digital frontiers. So that's the paradox of basically optimization and efficiency, where you really can't change that much. So given those observations, we asked ourselves, well, if we have those interesting assets, the network, the data, the billing relationships, et cetera, how can we go and start, arming ourselves with those, different bets that we're going to make into those future value pools? And we decided to go with a typical, venture capital model in which STC is going to open up those assets and put in capital, in companies that are going to be probably much better positioned to monetize and leverage these assets than STC will to attack those new frontiers. So, and it's quite humbling in many ways for a telco to do that, and I admire them for it, because it also signals internally an understanding that we have to open ourselves up to those disruption forces. We have to open up our closely guarded assets to those new players and find a way where we both have skin in the game to create value together. So and this is what we did. So STV today is $500 million fund. It's going to be structured in a typical governance model where there is a GP and SEC is a single LP. An investment thesis that pursues growth in these new areas while maintaining a linkage back to STC to leverage those core assets that we just talked about. And it's a win-win for everyone. So on one hand, you're creating value on the upside in equity and just equity growth as a venture capital investor. But also in many ways, given that linkage you're providing back to the portfolio companies to the telco assets, you're also creating a recurring way of increasing basically return on invested capital. So there is an interesting ROIC effect on the legacy assets. So this is what we're doing.
The investing bit just yet, because we'll get to that in the next part. I think my question is more around what are some of the technologies that you're going to be looking at investing into?
Across the board. So the way we segment the world is core tech and MTech. MTech is emerging technologies, things that are pretty disruptive in nature. The value within the value chain is shifting, and They're constantly in a state of flux. So things like blockchains, cryptos, AI, machine learning, drones. A lot of these industries, there is a lot of intensity of competition, but there is also a I would say, an unstable view on where value resides. And we segment that world into an MTech bucket where we're going to invest heavily, and probably we're going to invest a lot of capital there outside of MENA, because we're not too happy with the state of activity in that bucket in MENA. But we also want to play a demand generation effect where we get some MENA activity in those buckets. And on the first bucket, the core tech buckets, it's the usual stuff we're seeing activity in: the communications, digital content, digital payments, e-commerce, and all its derivatives. So we're going to invest across the board, and have a balanced approach that's going to basically weigh our risk-reward profile across these two buckets.
All right, we're going to get back to the whole investing in MENA bit and your rationale behind that. But I'd like to move on to Abdulrahman Addas right now. So in your case, MAF decided to take a different approach to innovation. In your case, you guys launched a wholly kind of separate VC arm. In your case, corporate innovation lies within the company. And you recently made investments, I mean, not so recently, but in Beam a few years ago, and then more recently in Fetcher. It seems to me that MAF really understands that you need to embrace disruption and get ahead of the game within your own vertical. And rumor has it, from someone sitting up here on the first row, that you even moved your big data team up to the CEO level floor, right next to you. So what is your thesis on where retail is heading? Don't get into the investing bit, because we'll talk about it a bit further. But I'm just curious to know your thoughts on the retail space. And Nico spoke about it a bit earlier as well today. But what's happening here in this region?
Very good. Look, yes, data and analytics are at the heart of our business.
I think you have to turn your mic on.
Sorry. Hello? Yes. So data and analytics are at the heart of our business. And yes, the data analytics teams at the groups now is sitting on the CEO floor. And we have launched as well our School of Analytics and Technology to be the lighthouse for upskilling and attracting the best talent in the region into our group to enable this transformation. Look, retail, like in any other industry, is being transformed, especially because of the revolution in the customer experience. Everything that the customer does, they like more intelligent interactions with the products or the service providers, and they'd like more convenient also services from these providers. And all of this is happening because of the technology advancements that enabling different parts of the customer journey to continuing to raise the expectations of the customers with regard to products and services. So we are in Majd Al Futtaim. It's very important for us to drive this transformation with our customers. We are cognizant of the fact that experiential retail is the way of the future. This is why we are focusing on adding a digital dimension to in every business that we do. Our aspiration is to become as digitally prominent as we are physically. Because omni-existence of all the channels for our customers between fixed and digital and maybe something else in the future as well is very important. I mean, I'll just give you the way we see it. I mean, the world is moving from infrastructure-based, undifferentiated mass services to experience-based, personalized, and inspiring services that are anchored by top-class infrastructure. You cannot live without a top-class infrastructure. But the game has shifted from mass, undifferentiated, uninspiring services to personalized and inspiring experiences. And this is our game. And we plan to be the winner in this game because of the top infrastructure we have.
All right, thank you. Khalfan, let's move on to you. First off, how many people in the room have actually heard of the Dubai Future Accelerator? Please raise your hand. Well done.
Nice.
Good PR team. Khalfan, so you had the Dubai Future Accelerator, also known as DFA, which aims to identify tangible governmental tech challenges and basically invites companies globally to come to Dubai and address them in innovative ways. Can you just give us, I mean, everyone's quite familiar with DFA, but give us kind of a high-level view of why DFA came about, why it was set up, and then also give us 1 to 2 examples, other than Hyperloop One, of companies that have come out of the last 2 cohorts and that are actually going to see some of their projects implemented.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank my dear friend Danny for this amazing setup, and thank Beko Capital. This is the 3rd event, and on behalf of the Future Foundation, we're happy to participate, and we look forward for more participations. Let me start with the companies first, and I'm not going to go by preference, but the last I've seen in the companies that came out of the DFA, which are the ones that I've seen in the news. For example, I've recently seen Movement, which is a German company working on a bus-on-demand technology using artificial intelligence, and they've just signed a contract with the Road and Transportation Authority here in Dubai. So this is a very interesting development from the program. There's also Consensus. Consensus is a known blockchain company as well. They've signed partnership with Smart Dubai office, which is also a big initiative, and they are an alumni from the Dubai Future Accelerator. But I'm glad I've seen a lot of hands raised up that people are aware of the Dubai Future Accelerator program, but I really want to steal the topic of the previous session and what David has mentioned and said, if regulators allowed. I actually quoted him mentioning it, and this is where we try to specialize in the Dubai Future Accelerators. As you know, typical accelerator programs get great ideas and try to facilitate growth in a fast way for them by either tying them up with venture capitalists, strategic stakeholders, trying to consult them or educate them. What we believe we have really hacked is adding the government regulation amendment in favor of the innovation in the platform. So what we have is we have more than 12 government entities participating, from road and traffic to Dubai Police to the municipality. And each of those government entities posts a challenge before the beginning of the cohort. And this challenge, then we outreach for startups based on that challenge, and they try to solve the challenge that has been posted by the government entity. And this helps a lot because when you have the regulators sitting with you and the decision makers sitting with you in the same room working with you for 9 weeks, it really accelerates the innovation and helps them reach where they want to reach. So that's in principle where we are with the program. We're in our 3rd cohort. We have more than 100 companies. We've converted around 80% MOUs. MOUs are usually the, let's say, the first reward that a startup would get out of the program. We're an equity-free program as a program, and the idea is for the startup to sign a contract with the government entity, which ends up being their first revenue generation point. And obviously then, through different relationships, we try to invest in them through our fund or other funds available. All
right, thank you. I want to move on, just being conscious of time, to the actual investment landscape now that we have taken a step back and looked at this from a macro level. Abdulrahman Tarabzouni, coming back to you. 2 things that I want to kind of go through with you. I was on another panel yesterday and we were talking about the funding gaps in the region. Curious to know what your point of view is in terms of which funding gaps here have been filled and which have yet to be filled, and why.
Good question. So let me start off by saying, in spite of all the rhetoric, in spite of all the headlines, MENA remains massively underinvested in comparison to its potential. You know, if you take any metric, whether it's available capital captured in headlines or actual capital that is available or deployed capital thus far that's actually really deployed across MENA, and divide it on GDP of MENA or population of MENA, you know, cut it in any way, we're massively, massively underinvested as a region. And just to give you a sense, for Saudi Arabia, to get to advanced levels of venture capital availability in terms of size of VC capital available in market, and you normalize it by size and everything. So we have to get to roughly 25x the amount that is available today to reach the levels of the US and Israel, right? And the story isn't different in other MENA countries. So that's number one. So the high order bit here is that we're massively underinvested across the board. And if you believe that we're in the orders of magnitudes of 20 to 30x underinvestment, then I think we're literally, just, it's a moot point to also discuss where buckets these underinvestments are happening. I think it's just across the board. I mean, if you really want to drill down a bit, there is obviously the biggest gap today is in the B+ rounds, right? Not a lot of people here are writing big tickets. Some are coming up today and are claiming to, and you're seeing this in the way that people are raising bigger and bigger funds in the region because that's where you need to deploy and write bigger size checks. But I truly believe if we agree with the first statement that there is massive underinvestment across the board and we're talking about the need to do 20 to 30x what we have today, then we just have a long way to go. Yeah.
And do you gentlemen agree as well in terms of the funding gaps and what you see? I mean, Khalfan, you're going to be about to launch a fund potentially. Or are you going to be involved in funding the ecosystem? I guess that's the right question to pose.
Absolutely. Here. I think this is the factor that's lacking in creating the ecosystem in the region. I believe every single enabler in the region is there, but I also believe that the funding gap, even using the metrics that Abdulrahman has mentioned, when we compare the VC investments versus any GDP, you'll see that massive gap. But our fund will be slightly different because it's a government fund. We don't have an LP obligation. We can be patient with our capital. We're sector and stage agnostic, and we look at three buckets basically. The first bucket is the majority of the allocation, and it's the reason why we're doing this is in direct investments in the MENA region, because this is the region that we want to grow. We want to support the entrepreneurs in the region. So a majority of the capital would be deployed in that space. Another bucket that we'll invest in is our global allocation. The global allocation will be different. It's more of a fund-of-fund approach because that area is not our area, and there's a lot of money in that area, and there's a lot of partnerships that we can build globally to make sure that there is some kind of diversification and transfer of knowledge from that bucket. The third bucket, which I believe is also significantly important, is deploying into funds in the region. And the reason here, even though we are aware as a setup that there could be some kind of double investments in our portfolio, but we believe that there are strategic funds in the region that share the same alignment and the same passion, and our commitment and deployment through them would help them even raise more and deploy more into the region. So we look at it from the bigger picture. Yes, we care about our IRRs and return, but we have other KPIs, which are job creation and innovation indices. So it's mainly three major buckets. We also can focus on deep technology, leveraging on the relationships that we have through Dubai Future Accelerator. We're not really focusing on consumer tech only because we really have the expertise around us to help us validate the deep technology. So let's take space, for example. We know that space is part of the UAE National Innovation Agenda. So if we have a technology that's keen on the region, that's willing to grow, we can easily pick up the phone and call the UAE Space Agency or Mohammed bin Rashid's space agency as well, or Space Center, get the validation on the technology and deploy and wait for 10 and 20 years for those technologies to grow. So we have that kind of patience. We leverage on our relationships with the Dubai Future Accelerator and government entities. And we want to support the ecosystem, which means direct investments in the region, funds in the region, and transfer of knowledge and diversification through a global fund of funds program as well.
Thank you. Well, you heard it here first. Abdulrahman Addas, I want to go into kind of maths remit as well. From the conversations I've had with you so far, it's very clear that you have a group-wide digital mandate. You've talked about focusing on tech infrastructure, product innovation, investing in talent, homegrown talent as well. Do you want to elaborate on that front?
Yes, look, as I said, adding a digital dimension to all of our business is very paramount. And our digital agenda consists of 4 areas. The first one is having the best and the most superior data and analytics platform in the region. The second one is having fit-for-purpose and scalable technology infrastructure. The third one is continuous product innovation across all of our businesses. And the fourth one is to be the magnet for the top talent, especially the tech talent in the region. So these are the 4 areas, and it's a journey. And so far, we have had commendable achievements. The first one, for example, currently we oversee one of the richest and largest customer analytics platform in the region with about 8 million customer records in our systems, only from the UAE. We haven't even touched the other countries that we are working in. We have launched our School of Analytics and Technology, and we are in the market to attract at least 200 technologists into our business. So please, all applications are welcome, whether for individual or teams or even acqui-hires, we are available. We have put in place a lot of initiatives with regard to product innovation. And we're already working on building and retooling our technology infrastructure to enable this transformation. For example, our investment in Fetcher is a very clear example of our focus on investing in regional talent that are solving big problems. I mean, entrepreneurs, at the end of the day, they're excited by solving world-changing problems that are addressing large and growing markets. Fetcher is a company that is built by local talent, solving a big problem in our region, and our investment in this company is strategic to our business. So yes, and I come back to the point about capital. There is capital. There is a lot of capital in the region. The problem with this capital, the source of it, and how they think about it, is coming either from trading business or a national endowment. And smart capital in these companies is different from these sources. The good news now, this capital, or the nature of this capital now changing. You have a lot of talent in the region that is coming to the region, and I really applaud the initiative of 1 million Arab coders that was launched in the UAE. That's a start of a big program that will enable a lot of talent to be on the ground in the UAE.
How many people have heard of the 1 million coders that was announced by Sheikh Mohammed? Okay, so, not that many of you, actually.
So that's inspiring, to be honest. Yeah. The second thing, we have a big problem in our region, which is it's a fragmented region. But companies like Souk and Kareem, they managed to create a virtual integration of our markets. That's big. So now you have talent. You have now large and growing addressable markets. The money, smarter money coming into play. For example, if you have big exits, like, for example, Souk exit or maybe Kareem exit, or a company like us thinking more smartly about our future, you will see now capital coming into the market, and the share of smart capital will take more and more share of the normal capital that is being now deployed in an ad hoc way here or there in the investment in the region. So it's all positive. Talent, virtual integration of the markets, and smart capital.
Okay, not to be a pessimist, but this is a good segue into the next section before we move on to questions. But some argue, being diplomatic, so some argue that there's a growing frustration amongst the regional entrepreneurial community when they're seeing some of the bigger players focusing on international opportunities instead of looking in their own backyard. So my question to all 3 of you would be, how would you address this criticism? And is it fair to expect the regional startup ecosystem to grow and thrive when the investor base is not necessarily evolving in tandem? The other question I had was, and Abdulrahman Tarabzouni, we spoke about this on the phone, is what are some of the main obstacles that you all see to your investing more in the region? Do you feel that family offices perhaps need to get involved first before funds at your level would feel comfortable to go in themselves? Do you want to start? Or?
Sure. I mean, let me address something, you know, at the core of could be at the core of the problem here. The hypothesis is smart capital is always going to follow smart opportunities. And if you take a look at the fundamentals of this region, MENA is probably, has the starkest dichotomy compared to any other region in the world when it comes to digital supply and digital demand. Very sophisticated demand side. So high smartphone penetration, high purchase power in the Gulf generally, just scale if you abstract away the fact that we have some fragmentation. But incredible demand. MENA punches above its weight when it comes to every single category you can think of that is big enough on the digital markets radar. So whether it's, I'll just give you examples. If you take MENA as a single kind of unit and normalize it for its GDP compared to the rest of the world, then you get MENA's fair share of the economic activity in a sector. So if you do that normalization, MENA in e-commerce does 1.5x its fair share, does in digital video 3x its fair share, and does in social media 2x its fair share. Now, when you look at the supply side of the equation, more than 90% of that value is leaking outside of MENA on the digital advertising side. More than 80% of it is leaking outside of MENA on the e-commerce side, even though you have that critical mass of sophisticated usage, demand side, high purchase power. So when we look at this as investors, it's clear that that delta only means a lot of MENA opportunities, right? So, and that's what's driving us to actually invest in these MENA gaps, because probably that's where the multipliers and the returns are going to be. So I believe that given these essentially just massive gaps and an interesting paradox/dichotomy of supply and demand, that this region is only posed to massive growth in these sectors. And you have the pioneers here like Beko and many of the funds who have seen this probably much earlier than many of us had and made those bets. And we're excited because we're all in it together, and we're de-risking the ecosystem for all of us. But I'm bullish on MENA. I think it's the time to invest here. I think the dichotomy is probably the starkest in the world. I mean, and I think most of this room knows the data in terms of how aggressive the demand side equation is. The supply needs to be fixed, and that's our role as venture capitalists. We need to, get the ecosystem ready, invest in great entrepreneurs, de-risk the markets for them, help them with market access, and just get the supply up and running. Because if we don't do it, then the Facebooks and the Amazons and the Googles of the world are going to come and eat even more of the value. And I'm not being defensive here and just trying to just draw an us and them kind of story. But China is a great example of how they really cracked this in a way where they had some free market dynamics, but a bit of protectionism to make sure that you can localize a lot of that value and build national champions who can absorb most of that value. So I'm bullish on MENA. I hope governments can back us up in terms of the regulatory hacks we need to do to get MENA up there.
Great, perfect transition to Khalfan. Khalfan, would you like to comment? One comment on DFA though. One criticism that has been said about DFA is the fact that you're basically importing companies from abroad to address problems that some of the government entities have here. But do you want to maybe also address this, this question as a follow-on to Abdulrahman?
First of all, I think it's a fair frustration, and hence we're doing all this to make sure that the ecosystem is fairly served. UAE is one of the youngest populations. The data also state that, highest mobile penetrating country, but so this shows you that we're a very young and tech-oriented country or region. But through the DFA is open to everyone, not only for international companies. Actually, 20% of the DFA companies are UAE-based companies. So the door is open for everyone. We just act as a bridge, as an access to feed those companies to the government to make sure that they innovate faster.
And do you think enough is being done on the regulatory front in terms of supporting the investment ecosystem?
So I don't think in the region the regulatory is a challenge compared to many other regions. As a matter of fact, I think regulations are in favor of innovation in the region. I think this is all because of the visionary leaders we have here and the targets that they set for us here. You think about it, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed gives us a target of having devise government entities all on blockchain by 2020. We have another target of having 25% of construction in the UAE 3D printed by 2030. Obviously, it starts with an increment of 2% on an annual basis. Autonomous transportation has to be 25% of all the transportation by 2030. So when you have those kind of high-level targets set by your leaders, it cascades down to the decision makers and the government entities to make sure that they actually deliver those visions. So I believe regulation here. And I'll also maybe comment on that's a book that actually Danny has gave me. It's called Startup Communities. And I've read that book, and obviously all the school of thought say that ecosystems usually start or lead with the entrepreneurs, and the rest follow when it comes to the VCs and the governments and all the other stakeholders. I think with the vision that we have in the UAE, I think the ecosystem is co-led by the entrepreneurs and the governments. That's how visionary our leadership is.
All right. I have my own thoughts on that, but I won't share.
Okay.
Abdulrahman Addas, when you and I spoke on the phone the other day, I was asking you what your remit was in terms of future investments, et cetera, and you said, no, we're open to looking outside the region as long as we're able to focus on talent here. And it's not just, hey, like, you know, we're company X in Silicon Valley, invest in us, and we'll open up like a marketing hub in Dubai, right? It has to come at a deeper level than that. Do you want to maybe elaborate on that?
Yes, look, venture capital is a difficult asset class. It's not easy. It's not for the light-hearted. And honestly, I don't blame investors or wealthy families channeling their money to funds outside the region to invest in startups also outside the region, because the reason that these startups, or some of them are doing well, because of the deal flow. The more deal flow you have, the more risk that you can manage by diversifying these investments. Now, the positive angle in this region, when you have governments and organizations, they are sponsoring innovation. They're sponsoring the digital revolution. They're looking forward to what's possible versus looking backward, what can we do with what we have. This is like creating a seed of ecosystem that will nurture talent, will attract a lot of talent, and when talent comes, integration of the markets, especially with the virtual integration approach that is being taken, you will have big problems. That will create a deal flow that is healthy, that will incentivize investors to accept the risk and deploy money here in the region. So smart money will follow smart opportunities here in the region. From our point of view, yes, we'll continue to investing in the region. We'll also look for investments outside the region, especially for investments that are strategic to our business. But most importantly, we'll bring talent and knowledge to our businesses in the different geographies that we operate in. A case in point, we have recently announced two announcements. One is our joining of Hyperledger, the largest consortium of blockchain globally, that will enable us to start working on use cases for blockchain with people either from the region or from people outside the region who are interested to apply blockchain in the region. The second announcement that we made, we are one of the founding members of Silicon Foundry. It's a platform associated with Sherpa Capital and Silicon Valley Bank, whereby we have basically our presence in Silicon Valley, whereby people from Silicon Valley who are interested in the region, who can own projects for us over there, and they can come here as well to continue these projects, or people from our region can go to this location, work on our problems or other problems in that area and bring it back to us. So as you can see, we're building bridges that will ensure that our region will continue to enrich the talent that will help us to basically grow our businesses, and we become the top attractor for this talent here to ensure that we are always the best in delivering our experiences and services to our customers in all the geographies we operate in this region.
Thank you. All right, so before we go to questions, quick firing round. Surprise, I didn't tell you about this. Hello. Thank you. So I'm going to say one word, and you're going to tell me the first word that comes to mind, and we'll be very quick. No thinking aloud. Ready? I'm starting with you. We're going in line. Okay. Sophia.
Schmidt.
Abdulrahman Addas, big data.
Future.
Khalfan, disruption.
Returns.
Okay. Fetcher.
Great company.
Kareem.
Founders.
Debye.
What's that?
Debye.
Dubai?
Not allowed
The
to
hub.
think. Beko.
Love them.
Beko.
Amazing.
Beko.
Dear friends.
All right, it's red, but I think we should take a few questions. There's a mic. Do any of you, this is the first time that these three gentlemen are on stage together. I think it's pretty monumental. If any of you have questions, this is your time.
Before we have a
Don't be shy.
Before we have a show of hands, so for all the pessimistic questions that you asked, and that we tried to flip towards being positive, I just want to, I look at these guys and I think to myself, we're so lucky to have you on stage. Abdulrahman, I remember you and I, 5 years ago, before you went to the Valley, you were still here, you and I were pulling our hair out, talking about how depressing and how terrible, how bad the ecosystem was, and was it ever going to improve? And, you know, I mean, look at what we're talking about today. Khalfan, I think I probably got on my knees like, 17 times to you and said, come on, bro, let's do this. He's here, he's on stage, and, you plot the graph, it's in the right direction. Abdulrahman, you threw me out of your office a few times, but you're here today, and you called us a friend, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, question. Sorry, I had to get that out. We got a shy audience here.
Why don't you ask your question, Danny, if you have one?
I have an unfair advantage. I've asked these guys questions before.
Hi. Abdulrahman, you were saying that the region is underinvested. I want to know the problem, is it that there isn't enough good projects, there isn't enough startups, there aren't enough entrepreneurs, or is it that we're still shy to invest as investors, as VCs, or even as governments?
It's a great question. I have some theories. I'm not sure if they're correct, but I'll venture to answer. I think the region and probably the capital, the obvious capital sources, namely ones who had a lot of oil wealth, had distorted economies. They were, living off a drug called oil that really just was a massive distortion in terms of how investment decisions are being done top-down. And it affected every single sector I can think of in these economies. Speaking on Saudi, that I kind of know, I think the oil bust is a blessing in disguise. It's recalibrating our thinking in a big way of how we invest, how we think about value creation, how we optimize our assets and operating arms to extract value and generate value, etc. So I think a lot of things are going to change. You have IRRs and return multiples that were mainly fueled by things like oil, and now that's out of the equation. And I think you're going to see money start looking and seeping through to pockets of growth that are probably technology related or whatnot, sectors that did not look compelling when an oil-led economy was booming. So that's one theory. I'm hoping we're going to see a fix of the distorted economies given the oil bust. Number two, and this is a theory we had back in the Google days. MENA, so if you segment the World Wide Web into phases, the 1990s to the 2000s was a time when the web was building a lot of what we called utility. So we called it the utility web. It was when Amazon and the pets.com came up, etc. So that was a time when a lot of the fundamentals of the utility web were being built. And 2000s onwards is when what we call the info social web came about, when the Facebooks and the MySpaces started coming in. And our hypothesis was MENA, a lot of influx of MENA users came onto the internet post-2000s, and they stumbled upon a info social web and kind of skipped the utility web. So if you believe in that hypothesis, then probably not a lot of MENA assets and indigenous players developed things that created value on the web, and a lot of the usage went to these info-social web applications like the Facebooks and whatnot, where MENA was a consumer of these applications and not a producer. But that's changing now. So if you add these two factors, a distorted economy and a consumption-heavy influx of usage that came about at the time when MENA skipped a utility web, and believe that these both are hopefully in the road to being fixed, then inshallah, I think you're going to see a lot more investments coming in.
Hello, hi. Maybe just a question maybe to the whole panel, but what are you guys doing about valuation? Obviously, in the Middle East, we tend to be a little bit emotional from an investor point of view. We get hyped really quickly, and then we get scared off really quickly. And at the same time, to manage expectations from the entrepreneurs. At the moment, we as investors, we see entrepreneurs are asking for, sometimes their ask about valuation gets a little bit out of whack. So how do you manage entrepreneurs when it comes to that? Thank you.
I will take that question. Our approach in investment is to work with high quality financial investors. This is why I said when you asked me about Beko, they're dear friends. Because when we make investments, especially strategic investments, this always debate comes between your heart and mind. Your heart going with the strategic angle and your mind going with the financial angle. So I would rather have the conflict myself. I outsource this conflict to the financial investor, the VC basically that I work with and I trust with. And basically, because of this relationship together, I focus on what I know best, which is the strategic angle, and the financial investor works on the financial angle because I'm sure he's not going to buy into something that he will lose money on because his motivation is mainly mostly financial. My motivation is mostly strategic. So this is how we do it. And this is something that we did not invent. If you look at the top CVC platforms, whether in the Valley or in Europe, they are always in partnership with a select group of financial investors, or VCs, that they work with. This is how we're doing it in most of the cases.
Did that answer your question? Or not really? Any other questions? Or do you have something to say, Abdulrahman, on the valuation question that the gentleman had?
So, I mean, I didn't hear the full question, but I would say on valuations, there was a lot of rhetoric recently that we're going to see a lot of inflation because of the influx of capital that's coming in, et cetera. So my only response to that would be, it's a natural cycle of, just the fact that it's a nascent industry. A lot of us are going to learn. Maybe some devaluations are going to happen, et cetera. But it's part of the cycle. And I think the right entrepreneurs/founders are going to, just prove to be, ones that are going to stick through with the right valuation so it's going to fix itself. So yeah, and I'm sorry if that was not the question, but I know a lot of people are always asking about the inflationary risk of influx of capital coming in. So
there's a question at the back.
This question is for the whole panel. A lot of people say that the ecosystem in general in the Middle East is underdeveloped and it's going to be developed. And of course, we are all hopeful for that to happen. My question is, when you invest in a startup or in a company, it gives an investor a lot of confidence to understand that if that startup or that company fails, the lifestyle of the founder or the CEO of that company is going to deteriorate. The fact that we have high disposable income and in the GCC in general and in MENA, individuals have a very strong safety net to rely back on. Does this worry you as an investor that if the startup fails, then the founder has a very strong safety net to work for the government, a family business, or his family business? Or is it not a problem at all? And if so, how do you go about it? I'm just saying this because in the US, if a startup fails, generally the CEO of that company has a lot to lose. And that's not really the case here. What are your thoughts about that? And is there anything you can do or we can do all to fix it?
And I think it's a good point you mentioned, because I think this is more of a challenge than the regulatory thing. I think it's a mindset change here in the region that failure is not an issue and that they need to pick up and start investing again. So I think this will take time, and things will definitely head in the right direction. But it's definitely something that needs time, and even in the government entity, we experience this from a government entity involvement in the startup scene. Whenever they interact with the startups, we see that basically they do not get the VC mindset and they do not really interact in the right way with the startup. So I believe it's a mindset change, and with time it will definitely improve.
But let me tell you, sorry if I can pitch in here, if we look at our portfolio, I would say the vast majority of founders actually don't come from money. And if they failed, it would be detrimental to their livelihoods. And to make it matters even worse, we have, as we all know, very complicated, if at all, bankruptcy legislation in this part of the world that actually makes it even more difficult and more risky than it would in the US. In the US, it's cookie cutter. Filing Chapter 11 and basically walking away from a failed enterprise. So we don't see that. I don't have any data to prove it, but I can tell you from our portfolio, yeah, the majority of our companies, anyone failing, I tell you there. And by the way, we have some of the guys, I mean, you saw the great Kareems of the world. If you look at round one, it was mama, baba, brother, sister, it was credit card debt, it was family, friends and family. And I tell you, you can ask Mudassir, Magnus is probably left. I guarantee you, if that company had failed, they would not be happy campers. I guarantee you that.
Same with Fetcher. I mean, Idris got money from his mom.
He's put his life-saving Fetcher into that, and his mother's life savings, her pension, is in the business. I really wouldn't want to see that go belly up for Idris and his family.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you.